We are all told the same story that China, once the world's biggest polluter, is finally going green. Solar panels stretching across deserts, massive wind farms spinning through the sky, electric vehicles replacing gas guzzlers. It all sounds like an environmental miracle. But what if I told you this green revolution isn't just about saving the planet? What if it's actually a high-stakes power play? A silent strategy to dominate the industries of the future, control critical global supply chains, and quietly trap the rest of the world in green dependency. Because while the West was busy holding climate summits and signing pledges, China was playing a different game. It wasn't just going green, it was building an empire out of it. In this video, I'll take you on a journey that starts in the coal-choked cities of 1980s China and ends in today's world, where China is leading the global green economy, not just with clean energy but with unmatched strategy, speed, and scale. We'll break down how China moved from coal to clean energy without losing power, the secret behind its global green tech domination, and the tricky game it's playing that could leave the rest of the world outsmarting. And trust me, what you'll learn in the last section might completely change how you see green energy. Let's dive in. Before China became the face of clean energy, it was drowning in smoke, literally. Back in the 1980s and 90s, China was rising fast. It had opened its doors to the world and was becoming the factory of the planet. Skyscrapers were going up, highways were being laid, and entire cities seemed to appear overnight. But behind this rapid development was a dark secret: coal. Lots and lots of coal. Coal powered China's economy like blood powers a body. It was cheap, local, and abundant. But it came at a cost. The skies over cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Chengdu turned grey. The air became so thick with smoke that you couldn't see the tops of buildings. Breathing itself became dangerous. In fact, by the early 2000s, studies showed that air pollution was causing hundreds of thousands of premature deaths in China every year. And it wasn't just the environment. Energy blackouts were becoming common. As factories demanded more electricity and urban centers expanded, China's old grid and fossil-fueled power plants couldn't keep up. The country was growing so fast that it was literally overheating, economically and environmentally. The world at this point labeled China a polluter, a threat to the planet's climate goals. News headlines accused it of building 2 coal plants a week and destroying global efforts to reduce emissions. But what those headlines missed was something more subtle, something far more strategic. Because while the West criticized, China listened, and it watched. It studied how global energy systems worked, it analyzed which technologies were emerging, and most importantly, it realized one thing. Fossil fuels had powered the last industrial revolution. Clean energy would power the next one. And China had no intention of being left behind. By the early 2000s, Chinese leaders began asking a different kind of question. Not how do we reduce pollution, but how do we dominate the future of energy? This shift in mindset would set the stage for one of the biggest and smartest energy transitions in modern history. But at the time, it was quiet. There were no flashy announcements or bold claims, just a slow, strategic pivot happening behind the scenes. What looked like chaos and crisis from the outside was, for China, the perfect storm and the perfect opportunity to rewrite the global energy game. And that's exactly what they started doing. While the world was still calling China the biggest polluter on the planet, something unexpected was happening behind closed doors. China wasn't just worried about pollution or climate change, not at first. What it really feared was energy insecurity. You see, despite having tons of coal, China had very little oil and natural gas. And yet, it was importing more and more of both to fuel its growth. That meant China's economic engine was now tied to foreign oil tankers, volatile markets, and geopolitics it couldn't fully control. That terrified the Chinese leadership. So while other countries focused on fossil fuel deals and oil wars, China started quietly hedging its bets. It began asking, what if we could generate our own energy cleanly, locally, and cheaply? Not just to clean the skies, but to become independent, to control the energy of the future the way OPEC once controlled the past. The turning point came in 2006. While barely noticed in the West, China passed something called the Renewable Energy Law. It was a bold move. The government began pumping billions into solar, wind, and hydro projects. But here's the thing, they didn't just build solar farms, they built factories to make the panels. They didn't just install wind turbines, they invested in the companies that design, manufacture, and export them. In other words, China didn't just want to use green energy, it wanted to own the entire industry. At this point, the West was still treating green energy like a niche sector, a luxury for rich nations. Solar was too expensive, wind was unreliable, and electric vehicles were seen as toys for tech enthusiasts. China saw it differently. It saw a chance to corner the future market before anyone else realized what was happening. The strategy was brilliant and quiet. China flooded its domestic market with subsidies. Local companies were encouraged to scale up, and when global demand finally started rising, China was ready. Its companies were already producing at massive scale, and no one could compete with their prices. In less than a decade, China went from an energy follower to a clean energy superpower in the making. And yet, most of the world didn't see it. They thought China was just cleaning up its pollution problem. But the truth was far more calculated. China wasn't just fixing its past, it was securing its future. And that future, it was about to hit the global stage in a big way. By the time the world finally realized green energy was the future, China had already taken the lead, quietly, aggressively, and almost completely. Let's start with solar power. Today, nearly 80% of all solar panels in the world are made in China, not just assembled, fully manufactured. From the mining of raw materials to the refining of silicon, from panel construction to global shipping, China controls it all. Countries like the US, Germany, and India may talk about solar independence, but the truth is they're still buying the technology from China. And it wasn't just solar. China went all in on wind energy too. It now operates the largest wind farms on Earth, and Chinese companies dominate the wind turbine supply chain. Even offshore wind, once considered too complex and expensive, has been conquered by China's engineering efficiency. But the real power play? Electric vehicles. China realized that EVs weren't just about cutting emissions, they were about controlling the automotive future, and more importantly, the batteries that power it. So they built battery factories, hundreds of them. They invested in lithium mines in Africa, South America, and Asia. They secured cobalt, nickel, graphite, all the materials the world needs for EVs, smartphones, and storage systems. And then they did something that stunned global markets. They made these batteries faster and cheaper than anyone else. Today, 6 of the top 10 EV battery makers in the world are Chinese. And companies like BYD, CATL, and NIO are not just supplying Chinese cars, they're powering vehicles around the globe, including some Western brands. But China didn't stop at production. It exported its green tech through diplomacy. Under its Belt and Road Initiative, China began building renewable energy projects in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Solar plants, hydro dams, transmission grids, all financed, built, and sometimes even owned by Chinese companies. This was no longer just about cleaning up air back home, this was global market domination. Meanwhile, countries like the US and EU were still debating tax incentives, local manufacturing policies, and trade protections. They were playing catch-up, but China was sprinting ahead. And by the time global demand exploded for green technology, for solar panels, wind turbines, EVs, and lithium batteries, the world had only one place to turn: China. What looked like environmental leadership was also an economic masterstroke. And what many thought was just an internal energy shift turned out to be a global takeover. But here's where things got tricky, because now that China controls the future of energy, it's not just about supply and demand anymore. It's about influence, dependency, and a growing sense of vulnerability in the rest of the world. On the surface, China's green energy revolution looks like a global win. Clean energy, lower emissions, cheaper solar panels, and electric vehicles for the masses. What's not to love? But beneath the surface lies a much more strategic, calculated game, and now the world is starting to realize it. Because China isn't just the world's biggest producer of green technology, it's also becoming the world's green energy supplier. And just like how the world once depended on Middle Eastern oil, we are now becoming increasingly dependent on Chinese batteries, solar panels, and critical minerals. This is where game turns tricky. Let's start with rare earth elements, the invisible backbone of modern technology. They're essential for wind turbines, electric car motors, smartphones, and even military systems like fighter jets and missile guidance. Guess who controls over 85% of the world's rare earth processing capacity? China. And it's not just production. China has been quietly buying up mines across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, often through long-term contracts or infrastructure for resources deals. While other countries were focusing on software, finance, or oil, China was securing the raw materials of the future. This control gives China leverage, and it's not afraid to use it. In 2010, during a territorial dispute with Japan, China cut off rare earth exports overnight. The message was clear: cross us and your supply chain suffers. Now imagine what could happen if a similar dispute arises with the US, the EU, or India, all of whom rely heavily on Chinese-made green tech. Even more concerning is how entrenched this dependency has become. For example, even if a US company designs an electric car, the battery cells, the components, or even the machinery to make them might still come from China. And building an alternative, that takes years, if not decades. This isn't just about economics anymore. It's about national security, technological sovereignty, and geopolitical influence. Now, Western governments are waking up. The US has passed the Inflation Reduction Act, pumping hundreds of billions into domestic green tech. Europe is scrambling to build local battery factories and secure alternative mineral sources. India is rolling out its own EV and solar incentives, but here's the problem. They're years behind, and China isn't slowing down. Every solar panel installed, every EV exported, every battery shipped tightens China's grip on the future. And unlike oil, which runs out, solar and battery markets grow year after year, meaning China's power isn't temporary, it's scaling. And perhaps the most ironic part, the world's push to fight climate change has unintentionally handed China a new form of dominance. In the past, power came from oil fields and gas pipelines. Today, it comes from solar factories and battery mines. And unless the rest of the world can catch up, China's green empire will only grow stronger. But is it too late? Or is the tide finally beginning to turn? For years, the world watched China's green energy rise with curiosity, maybe even indifference. But now, that curiosity has turned into urgency, because the truth has become impossible to ignore. China isn't just leading the green energy revolution, it's dominating it, economically, technologically, geopolitically. And the rest of the world is scrambling to catch up. Let's start with the United States. After years of lagging behind, the US finally launched its biggest counterattack, the Inflation Reduction Act. With nearly $370 billion allocated for clean energy incentives, it's a massive push to bring green tech production back home. Battery plants, solar factories, EV incentives, all designed to reduce dependence on Chinese supply chains. But there's a problem. You can't build a factory overnight, and you can't mine and process lithium or cobalt without time, permits, and global cooperation. So even with all the money in the world, speed remains China's biggest advantage. Meanwhile, Europe is feeling the heat too. Countries like Germany and France are trying to launch made-in-Europe battery projects. The EU has set ambitious targets for renewable energy independence. But again, they're starting from behind. And in an energy race, time is everything. India, often overlooked, is now positioning itself as the next big clean energy player. It's investing in solar farms, building EV infrastructure, and securing mineral deals with Australia and Africa. But India's challenge is scale. China isn't just big, it's decades ahead in manufacturing ecosystems, infrastructure, and state-backed financing. So here's the million-dollar question. Can the world really catch up? Maybe, but it won't be easy. It would require more than just money. It would take coordination, political will, and a rethinking of global supply chains. Countries would need to cooperate more, not compete. And they'd need to act fast because China isn't standing still. In fact, while the rest of the world reacts, China is already planning its next move. It's investing in next-generation batteries, green hydrogen, smart grids, and offshore wind. It's locking in long-term supply contracts across Latin America and Africa. It's shaping the rules of global green trade. And with its 2060 carbon neutrality target, China has cleverly disguised ambition as environmental responsibility. The truth is, the green energy war isn't about solar panels or electric cars anymore. It's about who controls the future, who sets the standards, who owns the infrastructure, and who the world depends on. China saw that future first. And while the West was debating climate politics, China was quietly building an empire. One solar panel, one battery, one mine at a time. So the next time you plug in your EV, charge your phone, or turn on light powered by solar, ask yourself, who really owns the power?